Welcome to another video from ExplainingComputers.com. This time, I'm going to discuss what we can do to help make Linux more popular. Over the years, there have been various manifestos focused on Linux development and documentation. But to increase adoption, I think what we now need is an end-user manifesto, and that's what this video is all about.
The Linux kernel, huh? More like he means operating systems that use the Linux kernel, which is usually the GNU+Linux systems.
The Linux operating system kernel was created by Linus Torvalds in 1991. And since that time, as we can track here on DistroWatch, hundreds of distributions
but the fact is that all of those are also derivatives of the GNU operating system, so it really didn't start at the Linux kernel. It started at the GNU operating system. Yeah.
Today, Linux is widely used in enterprise environments, and in particular on web servers and supercomputers. However, in the purest sense, Linux adoption by end users remains relatively small. Indeed, as we can see here on StatCounter, in November 2023, Linux has a 3.21% share of the desktop computing marketplace.
I don't know what StatCounter is measuring. It's pretty strange. Also, there is no way to actually get a reliable answer to how many people are running the GNU+Linux operating system, or some other operating systems that might use the Linux kernel, because, well, as it's a free software system where people can modify the system to do what they want, and because of that, basically, like, the operating system doesn't really spy on the users. Well, this also means that if someone installs a GNU+Linux system, it doesn't get reported anywhere necessarily. Of course, that depends on the distro. Some distros might report the use, but many of them don't. I doubt some of my installations, or even most, or even all of them, I actually don't know. I'm not that familiar whether some of these distros report the users. Of course, like, downloading updates and all that will report the use in some sense, because I'm downloading updates, so that at least lets the mirror maintainers know that there is someone downloading updates. But like it doesn't necessarily get reported anywhere that someone is using these operating systems, so these numbers are not reliable, that the Explaining Computers is saying from this StatCounter website.
Up from 2.77% in November 2022. It is, however, worth noting that Chrome OS, with a 3.73% market share, is based on GNU+Linux. So currently, approaching 7% of desktop computer users are now running a Linux distro of some kind.
Yeah, that's pretty much the case. Yeah, well, I actually don't have anything to comment on that, other than the use of the incorrect Linux name, but of course the Gentoo calls itself whatever it calls, so who cares?
If we take a look at StatCounter's figures for the operating system marketplace more broadly, we can also see that the most popular operating system is Android, which is also Linux-based. So, it may be argued that technically, Linux is already the most widely used operating system.
Well, you know what? The Linux kernel is not an operating system at all. So, no, you can't really say that it's the most used operating system, because it's not an operating system. It's a kernel. So, Android may be the most used operating system, but not Linux, because Linux is not an operating system. It doesn't even qualify. You can't rank Linux against operating systems and then pick the most used operating system out of those options, because Linux is not an operating system at all. So, if you want to talk about GNU+Linux systems, then that's different from Android, because Android is not a GNU+Linux system. It's Android. I guess you would just call it Android. It's not any other. It's just Android. Yeah, it uses the Linux kernel, but it's just Android. So you can make the argument that Linux is the Linux is the most used kernel, not an operating system, not the most used operating system. Yeah, well, that's that.
However, in the rest of this video, I'm going to ignore the popularity of Android and Chrome OS to focus solely on the adoption of
Lol, why?
Linux distros.
Well, who cares? His video, he gets to do whatever he wants. But that's strange. Whatever, let's move on. A bit arbitrary.
Today, there are several things holding back the wider adoption of Linux. Not least, there are too many distros, the choice is overwhelming for new users, and
I strongly disagree with that. Having multiple distros, it doesn't really do anything, because like, if you think about it this way, if you look at those maps of all the distributions and some long list of all the possible distros someone has made, like everything listed, no one cares about those. You don't just pick randomly out of that list. There's like, it makes way more sense to like look at the top 20 and pick one of those. You don't have to look at those millions and thousands of different distributions. You don't need to focus on those. Besides, of course, there's no central authority to decide what distro everyone should be using, but really everyone should just like default on some easy to use distros like Mint anyway. It doesn't really matter what someone starts out with. They can explore from there and try on virtual machines other distributions. I used the GNU+Linux system on a virtual machine for half a year before I switched my main system to a GNU+Linux system, because I wanted to do it right. So the amount of distros is not a bad thing. You just experiment with them, and then when you find the right distro to start out with, then you just install that. So no. Well, it might be true that to someone it might be overwhelming, but then again, computers in general might be overwhelming to someone, so who cares? That's not really reasonable, so yeah, that's nonsense. I strongly disagree. Having many distros is good, because it gives everyone a choice. The developers are free to create the operating system they want, and the users are free to decide whatever they want to use. So everyone benefits from the available options. Let's continue.
For example, a lack of driver support for certain Wi-Fi and trackpad hardware.
Yeah, sure, that's
things
totally
like
true.
that. These kind of things are pretty well beyond the control
Indeed,
of most.
and it's also beyond the control of any developers for the most part, because it requires a massive reverse engineering project to figure those things out.
However, I still think there are things that individual users can do.
The kernel? Didn't you just say that it's the most popular used kernel anyway? Well, he said that it's the most used operating system, but that's of course incorrect. It's a kernel. But it's already the most popular kernel, so why bother making it more popular? Now he said that he's specifically focusing on those some desktop things. But yeah, whatever. Who cares?
First on my list, I would suggest that all current users need to be an advocate.
Let's expand.
This might sound like a strange thing to say, but if, for example, we think about the world of Mac, Mac users, Apple users, they all evangelize about the hardware and the operating system, how good it all is, and yet not all Linux users do that. There are Linux users who are very, very keen to promote Linux to everyone around them, but there are also Linux users who want to, oh, no, it's not for you, it's very technical, you shouldn't do it. And we only have to look at the comments on Linux videos here on YouTube or in Linux forums or websites and reviews and things like that. There is a minority, but a substantial minority of current Linux users who seem to think it's a good thing to say, no, this isn't for normal users, this is just for us. And that constrains adoption, and that therefore lessens support for those. It's not good for anyone.
Some weird subsets of the users who use the GNU+Linux operating system, but that's really just up to individual behavior. I mean, if we talk about the GNU+Linux operating system, it's an operating system, anyone can use it. So like, you can't really expect any behavior from the people who use it. It's not any different from, like, let's say Windows. A bunch of different people use Windows just because it just happens to be on the computers they buy on the store or something. So you don't really expect any specific behavior from users of Windows. They just use Windows. It's just an operating system. So, I mean, they are individual people is what I'm trying to say. So however someone decides to behave, that's up to them. There is no single community of people who use an operating system, so that's a bit nonsensical, Now, of course, he could be specifically addressing that the specific people who want to advocate, they would need to do. They should avoid gatekeeping, but yeah, whatever. Let's continue.
Very important that we all think to ourselves whenever we leave a comment or something on anything to do with Linux, are we leaving a comment which will make people go, yes, I want to get involved with that, or, oh dear, that's a bit defensive, I wouldn't be involved.
Strange,
it's important.
to give it about some emotional response someone might have. I use the GNU+Linux operating system because it respects my freedom. However someone behaves and talks about the operating system, I don't really care about that. I use it because it respects my freedom. Now, if someone listens to some idiot talk about something, and then they use that idiot and what the idiot says to decide what they want to do, well, that's their mistake. But that's just life. Yeah, who cares? Move on.
Gatekeepers. Second on my list, I think it's equally important we're all tolerant of other users' choices, by which I mean other users' choices of distro, their choice of desktop. Again, Linux gets into really intense arguments sometimes, and that's good. It's good we have lots of distros.
Didn't he
People
just
can
say
run the
that
version of Linux they
having
want to make
multiple
it.
distros is bad? That sounds like a contradiction. That's a bit... Okay, there's no consistency here. Whatever. Yeah, he's talking about choices. Yeah, sure, I agree. Respecting people's choices is good. Like I mentioned, I came here because the operating system respects my freedom, so yeah, respect people's choices, that's good.
Pick the desktop they want. Some people like GNU, some people like KDE, some people like Cinnamon, or whatever it is, XFCE. But we should respect that people have made the choice and it's reasonable, rather than, as we see sometimes happening, people going, well, this is the best desktop. If you're not using it, you're an idiot. You need to relearn how you use a computer.
Yeah,
that sort of discussion takes place a lot.
Because there are certainly some weird people who use the operating system, but I already mentioned this, I already talked about this. They are just individual people. You can't just group people based on what operating system they are and then assign some specific idea of those people. Basically, you are just grouping those people arbitrarily because they just happen to use the same operating system. Everyone is responsible for their own behavior. I don't speak for anyone else other than me. So, whatever someone else who uses the same operating system as I do, whatever they say, that has nothing to do with me. I mean, if you really think about it, like, try to apply this same mentality to anything. Any other, like, tool or something that people use. Yeah, it's a bit... Yeah, like, you don't expect behavior from people who just happen to use the same operating system. That's a bit strange. Yeah, well, let's actually move on.
And again, that's putting up a barrier. I think we should all be celebrating the fact, if we use Linux, we do use Linux, and other people use Linux, and they use it differently to us, and that's fantastic. That shows the flexibility of Linux, the fact that it isn't about imposing control from the maker of the operating system, it's about the user having control. So let's all have a little bit of tolerance about the fact that whilst someone else might run Linux differently to us, that's fine. We can all be happy about that, and we can all be proud to be Linux users.
Yeah, I pretty much agree with the idea he's putting out, but again, disagree with the terminology he uses. I don't care about the Linux kernel specifically. When he said at the beginning of the video that he's talking about the so-called traditional Linux desktops, as he put it, well, he pretty much just means GNU+Linux, right? That's what it means. The traditional, the quote traditional Linux desktop unquote, that's really just GNU+Linux. So that's what he's talking about. He just doesn't wanna say GNU+Linux. So yeah, I mean that's what it means. What else would it mean? So yeah, but I pretty much agree with his. Yeah, I agree with what he's talking about. I just don't agree with the terminology. Yeah, let's move on.
Third on my list, and kind of related, I think we all do need to accept that many people cannot currently use Linux.
Well, what does it mean to accept it? They accept it. Well, like, it's not wrong to use any other operating system. I'm against proprietary software. Proprietary software is evil and it subjugates users. But it's not the use of proprietary software which I say is wrong. It's the creation of proprietary software and the development and distribution of proprietary software. That's what's wrong. The use of proprietary software isn't wrong because, well, it's your life. You get to do whatever you want with your own life. If you want to use proprietary software, that's your choice. So there's nothing wrong with that. But so when I say that I oppose proprietary software, then it's those companies or any other entity which develops that proprietary software who does wrong. So do I accept that people cannot use the GNU+Linux operating system? Well, the term accept is a bit strange, but yeah, I don't really care either way what other people do in that sense. I would encourage them to use an operating system which respects their freedom, and I would gladly tell them about the freedoms that the GNU+Linux system offers. But yeah, sure. Accept it, whatever. But like, also, do I accept the existence of proprietary software operating systems? No. But do I accept that people use them? Well, kind of yeah, because like it's their choice, they get to choose whatever they want to do. So yeah, sure, whatever. Move on.
And this is sad, but it is true. And again, this leads to lots and lots of debate. You know, there are people who say you can do everything you like on Linux, and to a certain extent that is true. You know, anything you want to do on a computer, there is a way to do it on Linux.
For the most part. As for like, there may be a few select scenarios where something might be a bit difficult, but for those few people who who require some proprietary software that only runs on Windows, let's say, well, I mean, they will always just have some sort of a dual boot or something to deal with that scenario. So for the most part, most users, like the average citizen, basically, they could just as well run the GNU+Linux system. Yes, that's true. But like, yeah. So yeah, it's also, yeah, that's true. Yeah. Move on.
But that doesn't mean right now we all have the option and the flexibility to do everything we'd like to do on Linux, or at least to do it as easy as we can, most obviously in Windows. You know, not least, we do not have at the moment the Adobe suite for Linux. We do have lots of good Office packages, but we don't have a locally installable version of Microsoft Office.
Yeah,
we can use the online version, but it's still not quite the same.
Those might be the few select scenarios if you need that specific program, like the Adobe software for some reason. Yeah, you can dual boot Windows or some shit like that. I wouldn't advise doing that because it's proprietary software and it takes away your freedom, so for your own freedom's sake, you should avoid proprietary software and use free software. Yeah.
And so there are, for many of us, good reasons why we can't use Linux. Some companies don't let people do it, you know, certain bits of software only available for Windows, all that type of stuff. So I think we also need tolerance for the fact that many people are running a mixed environment and have to run a mixed environment. I boot Linux every morning. It's the first operating system I start with in a day, often the last one I finish with. But in the middle, I will have run Windows most of the time if I'm doing video editing, because whilst I could edit in DaVinci Resolve perfectly happily, I don't have an alternative to Adobe After Effects, a layer-based compositor. I've looked and looked and looked. I keep looking, but I don't at the moment. There are node-based compositors, but I'm not quite as good as After Effects in terms of layer-based. And still, there isn't a really good alternative to Photoshop. Recently, I have been doing a lot of work in Linux and using things like GIMP for reasons that I've been away from some systems I normally use, and it's worked, and it's been slower. And it's been, you know, so I think we do have to accept that there are very good reasons some people can't use Linux, and they're therefore not trying to be difficult to say, I want to use Windows. I'd rather do everything I did in Linux, but at the moment I can't do it. We will get there, and we have to be tolerant of that.
It starts with the assumption that, like, people assume that using other operating system is wrong, but I disagree with that anyway, so yeah, I'm not gonna comment on this part because I basically explained my position already.
As part of a debate, rather than dismissing people when they say, I can't use Linux. Yes, you can, you're an idiot. You're not an idiot. It's because there are technical reasons, practical reasons, that right now we can't all go straight to Linux. Fourth on my list, I think it's very important that those of us who do run Linux spread the word about how Linux has improved. So often I see comments here on YouTube when I do a Linux distro review, and people go, oh, Linux is rubbish, I tried it 10 years ago, and there weren't proper drivers or whatever their complaint was. And it's like, yeah, it's improved a bit, you know. There are a lot of urban myths around about how things don't work in Linux, about driver support. Okay, I said at the start of this there are still some driver issues, there are, but lots of things are now sorted. You know, for a lot of standard day-to-day computing, Linux works very well indeed. And
especially when it comes to something like playing video games, now with Valve developing their Proton things and all that, all the video games they run on those Steam games and all that, it now runs basically almost perfectly, as far as I'm aware. I don't do that myself, but from what I hear and what I see on the internet, that works really well these days. So yeah, if you tried the GNU+Linux operating system 10 years ago, then it's a very different experience for someone who, for example, plays video games. Yeah, I definitely agree with that.
Don't have to mess around in the terminal. You've got beautiful graphical desktops, lots of distros really well suited for people coming across from Windows, and yet there are people with perceptions based upon what Linux was like a long while ago. So I think it's important for those of us who use Linux a lot to go, yes, it's better than it was. If you've not tried it in the past few years, have another go. You may be pleasantly surprised. Fifth on my list, I think it's also important that we separate the FOSS crusade from the use of Linux.
It's a big thing. Separate the FOSS crusade from the use of Linux, it says on the video. Now, first of all, mind your terminology. The use of Linux. Linux is a kernel. So whatever, I've already discussed that. I'm not gonna get into it now again for the millionth time. But now he's talking about FOSS crusade. What on earth is a FOSS crusade? FOSS is an abbreviation of free and open source software. Crusade. What is a free and open source software crusade? I don't know what that is, but I can make assumptions what he might mean by that. I myself I am of the free software movement. So I believe in the values of Richard Stallman and his philosophy, and I'm talking on my interpretation of that movement, basically. So I don't represent anyone else, of course, like I've said already. I talk for myself. But I agree with the values and the goals and the ideals of that movement. Then there is the open source people who promote that idea. That could be considered a certain type of a movement also. Then there are also, of course, other types of movements, that various spin-offs and also other things entirely that are very similar but have different roots and origins. Some who disagree with Richard Stallman but have similar views, or all kinds of things like that. So first of all, there is no one such thing as a FOSS crusade. I can only interpret what that might mean. Different groups of people with different goals and values. So if I, for the sake of this talk, interpret as FOSS crusade as, for example, the free software movement, then separate the free software movement from the use of what I imagine is GNU+Linux, as he started at the video. He said the traditional Linux desktop. That's what he said. That means GNU+Linux. So he's saying that the free software movement, as I interpret that FOSS crusade to mean, should be separated from the use of GNU+Linux. If that is the correct interpretation, then I strongly disagree. Very strongly. In fact, that is my biggest disagreement so far. See, GNU+Linux is a version of the GNU operating system. And the GNU operating system was specifically started to pursue freedom. So to then separate those two, no. That's nonsense. I can see how he's already doing that, refusing to call the operating system GNU+Linux instead of referring to it as a, quote, traditional Linux desktop, unquote, which really just means GNU+Linux. So, I mean, other operating systems that use Linux, like, what are they called, the Alpine and whatever, those exist, but they are not traditional Linux desktops, as he calls it. So yeah, it really is just GNU+Linux. So I disagree with what he says, that the free software movement should be separated from the use of the operating system, because the operating system specifically exists for the movement, the free software movement. So also, one interesting thing is, why does this Explaining Computers guy want to promote the use of GNU+Linux in the first place, if he wants to separate the values from the operating system? Why would he want people to use the operating system then? Does he have some sort of a personal agenda? If he agrees with the movement, then, or some movement at least, not necessarily the free software movement, but some other movement, then if he agrees with those movements, and that's why he wants people to use the operating system, then separating the movements from the operating system is counterproductive. You should do the opposite. You should emphasize those values. Yeah. If I tell people to use the GNU+Linux operating system, I start with the values of freedom and how the operating system respects the user's freedom. I may explain how that happens in practice, for example, allowing the user to do whatever they want on the computer without being restricted and all kinds of other things. I'm not going to get into that in detail now, but yeah, I disagree that the values should be separated from the operating system. That's bad. Of course, again, he is using the terminology completely wrong. But yeah, let's move on. I've already explained that earlier.
If you're not aware, FOSS stands for Free Open Source Software. And a lot of people are aware of the fact that Linux was created to be a free operating system. That was part of the initial
Again, Linux
reason for doing
is
it.
not an operating system, it's a kernel. GNU operating system was started to pursue the free software movement. The Linux kernel wasn't even free software, free libre initially. It was a proprietary kernel at first. It was only later that Linus Torvalds made it a free software kernel, free libre. Yeah, that's also an interesting fact. So no, that's technically false. Linux was not started as a free software thing. It's not a kernel. I mean, it's not an operating system at all, it's a kernel. And it wasn't even started to be free software. It was really just a hobby project for Linus Torvalds. But the GNU operating system was started. So it's a bit strange. Of course, explaining computers, this guy is aware of the GNU operating system and the fact that it exists and its relation to the GNU+Linux operating system and the Linux kernel. Of course, he's aware of that. He just fails to mention it. Yeah, he's already pushing his agenda of separating the operating system from the values. That's unfortunate. I say he should stop doing that. Do credit the people.
That's cool. But that doesn't mean it's a bad thing if there are paid distros. Or if there are bits of software running on Linux that, again, you pay for.
That's a big misunderstanding. You can buy and sell free libre software, which is what the free in free and open source software stands for, the term that he used, FOSS. He used that term. The free stands for freedom, the same way it stands for free in free software. The Free Software Foundation recommends using the term FLOSS instead, which stands for Free Libre Open Source Software, because it's a better neutral term, because it emphasizes the fact that it's free as in freedom, whereas free and open source software doesn't emphasize the freedom part necessarily. But it does mean still freedom, it's just ambiguous, so it's a bit... It's a poor term to use. It might lead to some misunderstandings. But surely, whatever. I don't know if he's actually aware of the free software movement. He should be. I'm not sure. Maybe he doesn't actually know about the free software movement. But then I'm confused as to what he is talking about in separating the... What could he be talking about? That's a mystery then. Nah, it does seem to me more like that he's just... No, he might just be misunderstanding that free... No, actually, I think he's aware of the free software movement. He just doesn't understand the fact that the free software can be sold. Okay, so that's what I assume. That he just misunderstood that. So, libre software can be sold and paid for. Yeah. Free means freedom, as in free speech. It is not as in free beer.
You know, the idea that everything on every operating system can get to a point where it's created by someone for free and all the intellectual capital, all the actual code, everything is opened up, that's not realistic.
Nonsense. We already have a usable operating system. I mean, the Linux kernel is already the most used kernel in the world, and plenty of like servers. Most of the servers in the world and all these supercomputers and everything runs the GNU+Linux operating system. So that's just blatantly false. Yeah, that's just false. The operating system can absolutely be a good operating system and be free software. Yeah, that's just nonsense.
I struggle with the fact that people still complain that, for example, NVIDIA, who've now got drivers available, but they aren't open source. Why should they be? There's no reason to be. There is a...
That shows that he disagrees with the values of the free software movement, which might also serve as a certain as a reason for him to want to separate the free software movement from the operating system. Of course, if he disagrees with the free software movement, then of course he wants to separate it from the operating system. Yeah, makes sense. So, yeah, let's move on.
A good argument, I suppose, about everything should be free and open source and everyone can see what's going on and that's a great idea, but that surely is an entirely separate debate to should more people, can more people,
Why do
would
you
it be
even
greater if more
want the
people
people
were
to
using Linux?
use the GNU+Linux operating system then? What do you care? I fail to understand. If you don't believe in the values of the software freedom as you just mentioned, then what do you care? Why should you care what operating systems people are using? Why are you making a manifesto, an end-user manifesto for the Linux kernel? Why are you doing that if you don't care about it? If you don't want free software? If you don't want software to be free, if you allow proprietary software to exist and you think it's a good thing, then what do you even care? Yeah, I wondered why does he care? He doesn't explain it. That's strange. Let's move on.
I do think we've got to the point now where clearly the FOSS argument hasn't worked, because as we saw in the figures at the start of this video, still a very small percentage of people run Linux.
What is the FOSS argument? I don't know what that is. There's the free software movement, which stands for user freedom, but these are different movements. They advocate for the same software, so I can understand the misunderstanding, but they are different, and he's really researched the topic before he makes videos. And also not intentionally deceive the people listening, which I think he is doing. But also, let's actually respond to what he said. The argument that something hasn't worked. What hasn't worked? Windows comes pre-installed on operating systems that people buy. So people use Windows. So does that mean that free software is not worthwhile, that free software has failed? No, I don't think so. That just sounds nonsensical. It's like saying that we live in a country that doesn't have free speech. So that means that free speech has failed. We shouldn't strive for free speech. That's silly. That's stupid. Well, just think about that for a moment. Just because we don't have free software right now, as the most popular and most used software, no, that's supposedly a reason that we shouldn't use it. And it's a failed thing. But if you apply it to anything else like free speech, to say that this country doesn't need free speech because clearly free speech has failed, that's ridiculous. That's stupid. Yeah, let's move on.
I think it's now time to say FOSS development, and of course that's not just Linux. You can run free open source software on Windows and Mac and everything else. And anyway, but I think we need to start saying, over here, that's cool, it's great, there's lots of free stuff on Linux, it's great, most Linux stuff is free, but, you know, if Adobe tomorrow said we're going to put our suite, Premiere Pro and After Effects and Photoshop and all that onto Linux and we're going to charge for it a normal way, that would be a fantastic thing, not a terrible thing. But it would.
Proprietary software is never a fantastic thing. It is mistreating its users. It is evil. Proprietary software is a moral wrong. To create and distribute proprietary software, that's wrong. The companies or any other entity that makes proprietary software is doing wrong. They are doing harm to the world. So, no, it's not a great thing, it's bad. What specific operating system the proprietary software is made for is irrelevant, I don't care. The fact that it's made at all as proprietary software is bad. If it were published as free software, then that's good.
Make some of the people on the FOSS side of things very happy. You know, I think it's a good thing, for example, that Debian has finally decided to include all the closed source multimedia codecs and things as an option when you install the operating system. We need.
Well, I've already actually explained my views on that. Debian situation somewhere else on one another speed. I don't know if it's where it might be available to any audience listening to this. But if I explain in short, Debian going non-free is very unfortunate. Debian was one of those, what metaphor should I use? One beacon of software freedom. It was entirely free, at least optionally, by default it was entirely free. It allowed the use of proprietary software from the repositories, but by default it didn't enable them. So it was one shining beacon, whatever, of software freedom, and then it goes proprietary. That's unfortunate. That's just, come on. That's just unfortunate. Like, you could have that as an option, but to use it by default, that's not, come on. But I understand the reason they would do it, of course. It's convenient and it's easy to use and all that, but Come on. You should make that like an option. Or at least provide me a fully free ISO optionally. Like, even if it's the default install proprietary software, at least give me a free software ISO and whatever. Whatever. But like, what is the explaining computers here saying? He's saying that proprietary software is a good thing. Well, that I definitely disagree with. Yeah, let's move on.
That stuff, it makes it work. Linux exists in a context, and that context is that most software and a lot of drivers and this type of stuff is not
Sure,
free open
I can
source.
understand. And I have already said that, like, the use of proprietary software is not wrong. For an end user to use proprietary software, that's perfectly reasonable in that, I mean, from the point of view of moral right and wrong, it's reasonable that any person can do whatever they want. So they can do whatever they want. If they want to run a proprietary driver, they can do that. I wouldn't take that away. I wouldn't take away people's right to run proprietary software. See, here's my position. If I was given the power to enact any sort of law or a policy or some sort of thing like that in a state, I would make it so that the publication of any new proprietary software, whether that's an entirely new program or a new version of an old existing program, they have to come with the source code, and the source code should also be free as in freedom, so basically that makes every software free software. I wouldn't make the use of proprietary software wrong, because that would deny people their freedom to run whatever they want on their computers. That includes proprietary software. But all software that's made should be free software. Now, I might make an exception for those old softwares which have already been released, because, well, like, it's a compromise that I might make. But of course, depending on how much power I could put out, how much power I'm given, I might make it so that every program ever made has to be made free software. Even the old ones. Even the ancient programs released decades ago, even they have to be publicized as free software. But that's a compromise that I might decide on at the time if I am given such a power. But that's of course just a thought experiment. It's unlikely that I would get such power. But yeah, it's a thought experiment. Anyway, but it does illustrate my beliefs and values. Now, of course, depending on how much power I'm given, if I'm given some sort of a godlike power, of course I would make all software free software. Even old abandonware I would make free software. So, I mean, I would just push it as far as I can. Basically, what I'm trying to say is I would push it as far as I can push it. So, how much power I'm given, that I'm gonna push it as far as I'm gonna make the absolute end goal, the point, the ideal state is to have every software ever made every time in the world to be a free software. That's the goal. So I would take it as close to that goal as possible. Any compromise or something I might make depends on how much power I would be given, and I might need to make some sort of a compromise or something. Yeah, but I'm not gonna get into that too much right now. And of course, the compromises would depend on the situation, how much power I'm given. Of course, if I'm given very little power, then I can't really do anything. So that's the reasoning. Let's move on.
And that really shouldn't be a thing that stops Linux adoption. I'd like to see more people using Linux. It's getting more popular. FOSS is great, but it's a
I find it strange that
debate,
he is even advocating for the use of the GNU+Linux operating system. Why would he? What does he care? I already touched on this earlier, so actually I'm not going to get into it anymore now, but yeah, that's strange.
The way I see it. Sixth on my list, and related to what I just said, I think we should all try to campaign for Linux versions of major applications. Without doubt, Linux is held back, as I said already, by a lack of major applications being available. If we just got the Adobe suite, if we just had Photoshop and Premiere, etc., and we had also Microsoft gave us Office on Linux, those two alone would make a massive difference for those people I was talking about earlier who can't move or fully move across to Linux. And personally, I'm glad to see there is progress being made. For me, the reason I can't do everything in Linux comes back to Adobe After Effects and Photoshop, as I mentioned, but it also comes back to the fact I rely on a 3D modeling package and rendering package called Lightwave. And Lightwave has just had a change of ownership, and next year, 2024, Lightwave is going to have a Linux version. And that for me is like, wow, that's going to make it possible for me to move more of my activity in the Linux direction. And so we can all be advocates in terms of trying to say to companies, can we have a Linux version of XSplit? And of course it's a chicken and egg, because when there aren't that many people using Linux, there's less reason for companies to do a Linux version. But when it goes up and there's more people using it, it goes around, doesn't it? But let's be advocates. Let's try to campaign for companies to create Linux versions of our favourite, our most important applications.
Sure, I don't care. That was a bit of a lengthy quotation or citation or whatever that should be called. Quotation, yeah, quotation is the correct one. Citations are different. I don't really care either way because, like, well, here's the thing. If someone is going to use those proprietary softwares either way, regardless of their operating system, then it is better to use it on a free operating system. So yeah, should those proprietary programs be available? Sure, why not? I guess the net result might be better if they are available, because if someone is going to use that software either way, regardless of what operating system they are using, might as well use it on a free operating system. So sure, I guess it could be available. But still, proprietary software is unfortunate. It should still be avoided. Richard Stallman has said that it teaches the users of that operating system not to value freedom if the proprietary software is accepted in the community. If those proprietary software versions are made available on the operating system, people might use it on those operating systems, and then it normalizes that behavior, and that might have actually a net result of a negative. That might actually have a net negative result. So making those proprietary programs available might, in theory, actually end up making more people use those programs. But I don't really necessarily agree with that, because I've already said that, like, use of proprietary software isn't wrong, so it's everyone's choice what software they want to use. So I don't really care whether proprietary software is available or not on the GNU+Linux operating system. It doesn't really make a difference to me, because I would just use free software whenever possible. But if I had to choose one or the other, then yeah, perhaps having it available is better. That's my opinion on it.
Finally, at number 7 on my list, just to note, I think it's important that we all try to give back where we can. Just because we can download our favourite daily driver distro and use it for free doesn't mean we shouldn't make some sort of contribution, because if no one makes contributions, they've got to run, even if they don't want to be paid for their labour, they've got to run servers and all the infrastructure and test things out. You know, it costs money to make and deliver free software, and we're back to the FOSS stuff, I know, but it's not a bad idea to be able to give some support, if you can, to your favourite Linux distro, just to help it along, you know. And I think, again, it's about signalling that in the market, and whether we like it or not, Linux, even if it is, a lot of it is free, is part of the marketplace, there has to be something that oils wheels and keeps things going.
Yeah, pretty much. I don't have any further comment. Let's move on.
We clearly need to have more investment in major distros. You know, I think the way Linux will have to go probably is we have more and more focus on fewer and fewer distros, and those distros need the development time and resource, and that's going to come from somewhere, and ultimately it's got to come from the user base. Anyway, that is my end user Linux manifesto.
I also listen to the ending here if there's something here.
Just a set of points about what we can be doing, what we can be thinking about to try and get more people using Linux, and in turn to try and get Linux better supported. And it comes down to what we say, what we type in comments when we're on social media and out on the internet. Everything has an impact on how people perceive Linux. And guess what I'm really saying here? We want to improve the perception of Linux, and we want to have, whilst we still have good debate about what's right and wrong and what we all use, that debate shouldn't become a barrier to other people joining us in the wonderful world.
I've already discussed all those earlier, so I'm not going to talk about any of that now anyway. Yeah, I'm just going to finish it's only 30 seconds remaining.
But now, that's it for another video. If you enjoyed what you've seen here, please press that like button.
Okay, well, that's it. I've now commented on his video, and yeah, if someone somewhere found this thing of listening to me interesting, then yeah, whatever. Yeah, that's okay. Interesting. This was something of an experiment. Yeah, well, I don't have anything else to say probably anymore. I've already said all the things I had to say about that guy.